it is Nikki. Welcome back to the channel for some super practical things to remember when you're writing fantasy or adventure, which I always or almost always forget. Today was supposed to be a bit of a shorter video just because this week is ramping up to be super busy. Honestly, I'm just counting on God to kind of help me through these next couple of weeks and get done all the things I need to get done. But I wanted to do this video because it's been kind of on my mind for the last couple weeks. It is something that sort of struck me as I was storyboarding recently, just thinking about all those tiny, practical, kind of boring details that we often forget as writers because we get caught up in the story. Created a little board for myself right here with things that I sort of catch as I'm writing that I need to incorporate later. Like, for example, I was writing the other day and realized, oh, my character hasn't eaten in days. Threw that up on the board, and now I will have to go back and add that in later. I've always just used my notebook. I'll have lots of lists in there of just things to address in draft 2. But the problem with my notebook is that it's an absolute disaster. It's basically just my brain barfing on the pages with no rhyme or reason whatsoever. So it's all fine and good to have those lists, but if I'm never going to be able to find them when the time comes and I actually need them, then what's the point? All that to say, I am happy with my new system and also slightly alarmed by the multiplying number of things that I'm going to have to go back and address once I'm finished this draft. Which brings me to the point of this video, a brief, non-exhaustive list of some of the super practical things to take into account when you're writing fantasy or adventure. Number 1, do not forget to feed your characters. Adventure stories and fantasy stories often feature a lot of travel, and sometimes boring stuff like making camp and eating meals just kind of flies out of my head because those tend not to be my favorite parts. If your characters are fixed in one location or they're at a rest stop somewhere, you maybe don't need to mention them eating. Like, for example, when the Pevensey kids are at Aslan's camp, you don't need to verbalize that they're eating regularly. We can assume that they're not fasting. Same goes for if you establish that they're bringing lots of provisions with them on a journey. We're going to assume that they're eating those provisions that they brought. But say you didn't remember to mention those things, or maybe they're in a situation where they don't really have access to food or water, and yet they're still continuing to do high intensity, high action things for days upon days upon days. Sooner or later, your reader is probably going to realize, oh, nobody's done any eating for a long time. Don't forget to feed your characters. And if you can't feed them for whatever reason, for a plot reason, say, that's fine. Just make sure you acknowledge the realistic side effects of that choice. Number 2, when was the last time your characters slept? Again, this seems like it would be super obvious, but this is one that I struggle with. I mean, my main character is basically nocturnal by necessity at this point. It seems like every night something is trying to kill him, and it makes it hard for him to get any actual rest. That's not really good if you want your character to continue functioning at full capacity. Unless your character has a superpower that allows them to avoid sleep, like Legolas, they're going to need to recharge in order to be effective. Otherwise, you're going to have to throw in some of the consequences, like sluggishness or exhaustion, or even poor judgment. All in all, you have to factor it in, otherwise the reader is just going to think that we totally forgot. Number 3, here's a goodie. Wounds. We all love them. I personally love it when my hero is all battered and bloody. Maybe that makes me a tyrant, but you know what I'm talking about. The problem, though, is where is all that blood coming from? Because stab wounds don't just go away because the battle is over. Do not forget about your wounds. Take them into account. Make sure that they're properly addressed, cleaned or bandaged, or magically healed or something. And if there's no magical healing involved, don't forget about the natural healing process and how long that would actually be. The discomfort and the pain is going to stick around for a while. When they're in their next fight, they're probably still going to be bothered by that stab wound from the last fight. It might slow them down a bit, but it's realistic and it's consistent. Number 4, keep track of passing time. I got myself into a bit of a predicament here in my current draft because early in the story, I had 2 villains meeting and deciding that something bad is going to happen in 13 days. Cool, 13 days, I'll just keep track of time as I move forward in the story and I'll be ready when that time comes. Did I do that? No, I did not. So now, 200 pages later, I have no idea how much time has passed. I could probably guess at the number of days that have transpired since then, but now I have to go over the story with a fine-tooth comb and try and work out the exact number of days so that I can land squarely on that 13-day mark. Just another thing to add to the things to address list. Moral of the story is keep track of time. And one thing that I would suggest that I have never tried, but I'd be kind of curious to try, is to sort of keep a diary for your main character. Nothing detailed, because like, I barely have enough time to write the actual story, let alone a diary for my main character. But just something super basic that just helps you to sort of keep track of the main events from day to day so that you have a reference for time. Just a thought. Number 5, here's one that came up for me pretty recently, and it might seem kind of obscure, but stay with me, especially fantasy writers, you might be able to relate to this more. Who is carrying what? And when I say that, I mean like weapons, magical items, or even items of like sentimental value, like the necklace my grandmother gave me, or the bow that I hand carved myself. Weapons can change hands in fantasy stories pretty easily. I mean, you get in a fight, things are being thrown around, your buddy picks up your weapon, starts using it, you grab the thing that's closest to you. Sometimes people give their weapons to each other as like a gesture. It doesn't even apply to just weapons. Sometimes they give the magical item to another character to hold on to for safekeeping. Things can really change hands quickly, especially if you have a cast that's more than just one person. So my point is, keep inventory of all the significant items that people have on them at all times. I kind of got myself into a pickle here in one of my past drafts. I was writing an early draft of a fantasy story, and in all the drafts before that, there was a scene where a father gives a gift to his son, a magical item to use on his journey in the days ahead. In that particular draft, I didn't include that scene. But later, the character had the magical item on him, even though I hadn't shown him getting it from anyone. And I totally just glossed over it, despite the fact that I had read that draft so many times, just because I was used to that magical item being his from all the drafts before. I caught it, it was a bit of a panic moment, like, whoa, where did this come from? I didn't explain why he has this. Yikes. That's why it's important to know what items of significance every character has with them at a given time. Number 6, weather. So pathetic fallacy is when you use the weather in your story to sort of reinforce the mood that you have going on among your characters. That's kind of why it's always raining in breakup scenes or sunny in the final musical number of a Disney movie. Regardless of whether or not you use pathetic fallacy a lot in your story, I think it's important to sort of mix up your weather a little bit. Can't always be a rainy day or a super hot day unless that's part of your world. Can't always be a clear moonlit night with perfect visibility for nighttime fight scenes. Mix it up a bit. You can incorporate weather into your world building. You can do all kinds of really cool intentional things with it. I think it's just important to give the reader some variety and to keep track of what that would do for your character. Is it hot? Is it cold? Is it sticky? Is it dry? What is that doing to your character? Is he sweaty? Is he super dehydrated and also now sweating, so he's losing water? They're all things to sort of take into account. Number 7, geography. And don't go anywhere, bear with me, let me explain. So you need to know what direction your characters are traveling and how long it will take them to get from point A to point B. Draw a map. Seriously, draw a map. Work out your scale, figure out your travel time, and then maybe work backwards from there. I would just advise against thinking that it's going to work itself out, because it won't. If you want your journey to take a long time, then give your characters a lot of ground to cover. Ultimately, if you don't know what your world looks like, what the land looks like, your reader probably isn't going to either. So I do want to note that there are ways around all of these things, especially when you're writing fantasy. The important thing, if you're going to bend a law of nature or biology, is to acknowledge that you're bending it. So your reader will just think, oh, you know, there's a curse on the land, that's why it's always cloudy. Or this character can teleport, so that's why travel time isn't an issue for her. As long as you acknowledge and establish the rule that you're bending, your reader will roll with it, no problem. We do it all the time. And one final thing, the big number 8. I personally believe that you do not need to let me know when your characters need to use the bathroom. Seriously, I don't need that. Just let me live in my fantasy land where these beloved characters are above all that. Maybe it's not practical, maybe it's not fully authentic, but I feel like if there's one practical thing that we can afford to just let slide, that is the thing. That's just my personal belief. So there are my top practical tips. I'm sure there are way more, and if I think of more, I might drop them in another video. In the meantime though, thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. Feel free to like and subscribe and comment with any tips I may have missed or instances where maybe you forgot about one of these things like I do all the time. And as always, do not forget to spend some time in the clouds today.